Well, welcome back to the shop. Got tired of working on the panels, trying to align the doors with the B-pillars and then putting the fenders on and trying to align and get the gaps right between the doors and the fenders and trying to get the fender line correct with the fender in the hood. And then obviously in the front of the car, then the fender still has to fit that front valance. So all of that has to go together. I started getting a little frustrated with it. So to be very honest with you, I stepped away. So I just went to my bag of stuff, which has been sitting here for a year. And I thought, okay, let's get around to rebuilding the distributor. Let's install the Pertronx ignition system. So it's an electronic ignition system. So we're going to eliminate the points, right? As I mentioned before, what points do is they simply interrupt the ground circuit on the coil. And by interrupting the ground circuit like a capacitor, it discharges down the coil wire. So we are going to change it to an electronic ignition. So I've already pulled it all apart. It had, of course, the drive gear on the bottom. Now, I'm not going to put the drive gear back on. Why is that? Because I'm getting a new cam. You don't put an old drive gear on a new cam, right? They need to be matched together, or they got it in. And what I mean by that is depending on the cam itself. Some cams, depending on the material they're made of, they don't want a cast gear. You might have to go to a brass gear. So until I know from the engine builder what kind of cam I have, I won't be ordering the gear, you know, and then once I get the gear, then of course I'll put it on. But getting the gear off is actually not that hard. There's a roll pin that you got to punch out. But what I do is I actually then put it in the vise. I put this end up against one side of the vise. I open up the other vise so it bites on the gear, and then you just close the vise. And as you're closing the vise, it obviously pushes in and pulls the gear right off the end. So very easy to get the gears off. Once the gear is off, you pull the whole shaft out, clean the heck out of it, because that shaft has got a helical groove in it. And what that does is as it's spinning, it's going to draw oil up and keep the shaft lubricated. And that can get pitty and crapped in there. So again, I cleaned it all up, put it all back together. And now I have, the only thing I've done is I've got the shaft installed and I've got the counterweights all cleaned up. Now, the counterweights. These older vehicles, they relied on two methods of advancing and retarding the ignition depending on the temperature of the car. First, of course, let's just go with the centrifugal weights. So the way they work is that there's a spring that holds the weights in. And as the engine RPM spins up and this starts spinning faster and faster, you can hear the clicking as the cams are flying out because I don't have the springs on them. When they fly out, they actually twist the shaft. So the shaft is actually two pieces. You see, I'm holding the bottom securely, but the top still moves. Now that top is allowing me to rotate separately from the shaft. And why is that? Because then as I'm accelerating and these gears or the cams start to spin out, it'll actually advance the rotor, which means the top part here will actually open up. So it will then contact the inside of the distributor that half a millisecond faster, which means the spark will be then firing earlier in the combustion cycle. And an advancement of that is very important because when the car is idling or you're just starting it, you can't have that much advance, so you got to pull the advance back. Now again, two ways to pull the advance back. One is that they use centrifugal, which allows me to go with the engine RPM. The second is they go with a vacuum canister, and the vacuum canister has an arm on it. That arm locks onto the base of the distributor and rotates the base as opposed to manipulating the top of the rotor. Now, how does this work? Well, this has two vacuum lines on it. Now, why are there two? Because actually, there's one on either side of the diaphragm. One of them is connected to the engine vacuum. So then as you're stepping on the gas, the vacuum actually drops, right? We all know that. When you open up your throttles, your vacuum drops, which means then this will pull to one side because there's less vacuum on one side of the diaphragm than the other, so it'll allow it to pull. But as a safety factor, the other side is connected to a heat-sensitive valve that goes on the intake manifold. So if the car is cold, it won't allow it to advance as far as it would when the engine is warm. So again, very well engineered for a car in the 60s, you know, compensating for engine temperature, advancing the ignition, making sure that you don't get too far advanced. But in my case, like I said, again, I have to talk to my engine builder what my total advance is going to be. Total advance is when the engine is at full operating temperature and you start to increase the RPMs, there's going to be a threshold, let's say 2,500, maybe even 3,000 RPM, where you're going to want the advance to be fully engaged, which means, let's say, 32 degrees of advance or even 36 degrees of advance. In fact, my other engine, I'm running almost 38 degrees of advance on that engine, but that spins to 7,000 RPM, so you really need to be able to have that much advance on that. But basically, in this case here, you know, it's not going to be like that. It's going to be, you know, 30 degrees maybe. But the idea is again, all of these safeties are in place so you don't hurt your engine. So let's get on to putting this all back together. So it's difficult to actually show you me putting the springs on. But as you can see, the springs are now mounted between the pins. And that allows it now to, as this spins, those springs are going to stop the cams from flying out. But eventually, the RPMs will overtake the springs and those cams will spin out, which will then again advance the ignition for me. So that's the first thing we need to do, is put the springs in, and then we put the base on. Okay, so the plate is in. What I also did is I have just a little dab of oil here, and I put a little dab of oil on each of the little plastic standoffs. And the reason is those plastic standoffs is where this then is going to sit on top, and it's going to be able to rotate. This plate is where the vacuum advance rotates it, so it can advance or retard the ignition based on moving the actual electronics, right, over the points. And again, as I said, those are the two different ways that it can advance and retard the ignition. So in this case here, this plate then glides on top of the other plate, and that's why I just put a little bit of oil in there. Now, some engine builders, and I'm going to talk to mine as well, they simply say get rid of the vacuum advance, right? Just, you know, get rid of it. It depends on how you want to put your car back together. Some people say, okay, let's get rid of it. Some people say, no, we got to keep it. But basically, in this case here, all I'm going to do is put it all back together. And worst case scenario is I simply, you know, put dummy lines on this so it doesn't get an advance. But at least I want it back together the way it's supposed to anyways. So all I got to do now is take this plate, which goes onto that pin, and now it's in place. Right now it moves as well, you can see. And this is where it gets grabbed by the vacuum advance and opens and moves the advance as well. So I've just got to put a couple of clips on here, and then we're going to be mounting the electronics. So just to show you what I mean, so I put the points back in. As you can see, the points are sitting on top of the cam. As the vacuum pulls the plate, you can see the plate moving, it actually moves the points across the face of this 8-sided cam here. And what happens then is that right now it's sitting on the high spot, but if I move it, you can see then it's sitting on the low spot. So the idea is this would actually move the points around on the cam through the vacuum. So as I said, you have the two, right? So we're going to eliminate the points, and we are going to put in the electronic ignition. One of the pins is where one of the screws went, so that just pins in there, and then of course only one screw holds it in. But basically now if we move this plate, you can see it actually does move perpendicular to the cam. So what that allows it to do then is to advance or retard by moving the electronic module away from the magnet. So as this magnet spins, it then picks up the location of those triggers within the magnet, and it then fires the ignition. In my case, if it advances or if it retards a little bit, it will also do that with this mechanism. So I guess what I'm going to do is put it together with it, talk to the engine builder, and if I do not need it, I will pull the vacuum lines out and just leave it sitting. But basically, that was it to rebuild this ignition system. Now, of course, the last step is to simply take this and push it down. And what we've got now is the electronic ignition. Magnets within inside of this head are picked up by the igniter. The igniter then fires the coil, and I don't have to worry about points anymore. I don't have to worry about them burning out, and I think that's a lot easier this way here as well. So I haven't put the screws back in up here, but that arm comes in and locks onto the top, right? So we can see that it's locked in. And then, because the screws aren't there, I can actually move this, but now you can see how that's going to advance the ignition and retard the ignition based on vacuum and, again, temperature of the engine. So I just got to put a clip on that, put the two screws back in here. Cleans this way up, right? There's no capacitor in here anymore. There's nothing, right? There's just simply the spinning magnet and the electronic ignition. Well, like I said, there's another video on rebuilding a distributor. Like I said, nice and easy. I like this electronics. This is great. You know, you just stuff the magnet on it, put the electronic module in, and you're pretty well done. Like I said, make sure everything is clean when you put it all back together again. There's no play going side to side, which is key, right? That means the bushings that are in here are in good shape. By cleaning that helical sphere thing, that'll pull the oil up into it, keep it well lubricated. And like I said, all I got to do is put a couple of screws like in here, got to put that clip on, and I'm done. So until next time, like I said, I hope you enjoyed the video. I think I'm going to be going into my box of junk. I've got all of the parking lights that I've taken off of the car and just put into a box. I'm going to take all them, bring them here, take them all apart, clean them. I got new gaskets coming for them, right, because there's new rubber gaskets and everything. But as far as the chrome and everything, they're in pretty good shape, so I'm going to keep them. And like I said, so that'll be another project coming up. I guess I'll probably get back to working on the fenders and the gaps. But until then, I'll talk to you later. Bye.